This is Awards Buzz. We're here discussing the Oscar shortlisted short film Cashing Out. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great. How are you, Abe?
I'm great. This film was one of the most interesting on the shortlist to me, something I knew nothing about. I'd love to hear how you discovered all this and what your reaction was when you did.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm a gay man and a history nerd, so this is a story that, would totally be of interest to me. But it's actually something I discovered through a conversation with my dad. I have a personal connection to the story, as you know, from watching the film, and that's sort of how I stumbled upon it and came to understand that I needed to make a film here. It happened in the early days of COVID back in 2020. I was back home in Florida on a walk with my dad one day, and I just said to him, sort of offhand, like, I obviously want them to develop a vaccine for COVID, but I can't help but feel sort of weird that there are these pharmaceutical executives that are going to make all this money off of a pandemic that has devastated so many people. And my dad just like shot me this reaction. He was like, "What do you mean by that?" And I was like, "Whoa, like, what do you mean by that? Like, what's going on here?" And that's when he said, I think I need to tell you about something," and shared this part of his past with me that I had had no idea about. And it sent me on a bit of an emotional spiral, but also a research spiral. And that is what resulted in cashing out.
It's interesting to hear you talk about COVID because I feel like there are some similarities between the AIDS crisis and the pandemic. The crucial difference is that the general population was susceptible to COVID. And so I think similar to how there were all these allowances for working from home and all these things that didn't exist before for people who needed actual accommodations for disabilities, et cetera, I
Right.
feel like there's not I don't think this kind of thing would have happened in the same way because the idea was that it's not just this one group, it's everybody, which is terrible, but also this isn't, I think we think this is not a good thing that's happening. So maybe that's, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And like, the basis for this ghoulish industry at the center of my film was government neglect. The only reason this thing had to exist was because the government had really turned its back on people with AIDS and, abandoned them and their basic survival needs. And I agree with you. I don't think that abandonment would have happened if it wasn't a marginalized group that was most susceptible to the disease. I mean, the cultural message sent at that moment was if you're a queer person or a drug user, which were two of the most highly infected groups, then this government has no problem with suffering and death being your destiny. And that's a horrible message to send, of course, but it's not one that the community internalized about itself. They said, great, you're not going to help us. We're going to help ourselves. We're going to find a creative way to come together, use a loophole, build unlikely coalitions, and try and make this work for ourselves because we know that destitution and death are not the only things available and waiting for us. We know that we deserve joy even when there's a plague going on.
And I think there is joy to be found in the people who survived, who long have outlasted the financial
Yes,
projections
yes.
of those who want to take advantage. I mean, again, there's a lot of this. I think that's very tragic, but there's something just so I don't know, not fun, but like something triumphant about the fact that there are those people who have done that and really turned the system through no fault of their own, other than their survival, right?
Right. Totally. I mean, there's a real joy in that feeling of, it sounds horrible to say given the context, but like you sort of have your cake and eat it too. There are people who are betting that you won't survive and you get to take advantage of the positive side of their bet. And then also you do survive. And, I look at somebody like Sean Strube, who's one of the participants in my film. He used the money from selling his life insurance policy when he had a 2-year life expectancy to start a magazine called Pause. And that magazine was the first source of information by, for, about the HIV positive community, which was especially important for people outside of, New York, LA, and San Francisco, where they had more established communities of HIV positive people. I mean, people all over the country relied on this magazine to feel like they were part of a community, like they weren't alone in their HIV status. And he was only able to sort of pour that investment back into his community because he got a hold of this money. But then he lived. And so he's been able to see this creation flourish over decades. Pause remains in print. Sean remains an amazing force for good in the world, not just for HIV positive people, but he was the mayor of this town in Pennsylvania for eight years. And, I think he lives a very special kind of life because he understands that his survival not only isn't guaranteed, but was literally bet against.
I know there are a lot of people who are very pleased to hear this story told and very interested, want to know more. I can also imagine there are those who do not want this talked about, especially because this is not so dissimilar from things that might still be going on to a different extent. Have you received any pushback, attempted censorship, etc.?
I mean, there are sort of two kinds of reactions, skeptical reactions to the film. One, I think, comes from people who don't want to venture into this morally messy area. People who want to feel morally pure. And I really understand that instinct. It's the instinct that I started out with when I made this film, honestly. And like how I sort of was initially approaching the subject matter. You don't like to feel like you're getting tangled up in mortality timetables and a profit motive tied to people's death. It just feels wrong. But I think when we're in moments of crisis, as we were, in the early days of AIDS, and I think as we are now, for reasons I can explain in a second, I don't think we can afford moral purity. I think that we need to survive. And if we need to be in the streets, we need to be advocating for a better, more morally pure world, but we also need to live long enough to enjoy that world. And these are the kinds of creative, weird, strange tools that people who have been denied the benefits of major institutions fashion for themselves to make it to that point. Then there are people on the other side who I think um, are wary of the implication that the film makes, which is that, um, I'll speak from this moment right now, which is we're witnessing a huge retreat by the government from our healthcare needs. We're seeing millions of people have their healthcare premiums, health insurance premiums skyrocketing. More than 1 million people have been kicked off of Medicaid since Trump took office this time around. And they understand what it looks like to have to figure out how to survive when the government just turns its back on your basic needs. And it, I think it's hard to watch Cashing Out and not come away feeling like there's a major deficiency in the social safety net of this country and in the healthcare system. That we are as rich a country as we are, and yet we don't have anywhere near as universal healthcare as many of our peer countries do. We have a social safety net that is so easy to slip through and so mired in prejudice. It's not only queer and HIV positive people, but people of color, disabled people. There are all sorts of ways that our identities get weaponized against us to deny us benefits, deny us what we need to survive. And so I think that there are people who watch the film and feel uncomfortable in themselves that they're starting to think about the social safety net and the healthcare system that way because maybe that's not how they're used to thinking about it.
There was a quote I read in the email I received about the film from Matt Bomer, just praising the film and saying it asks more questions than it answers. And I'm curious, is there a
Hmm.
question or two that sticks out to you most that you still want an answer for in what you've investigated? Not
Yeah.
orally, but more about, what information are you still seeking?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, well, first of all, I'd say on a more meta level, like a question I'm still seeking an answer to is, so if not this, what? Like, what is the right response? Like some people would say, well, you can't just throw money at everything. Like, how should a society respond to the reality and inevitability of illness and of death. And, that's the kind of question that I hope that the film poses to people who are creative and who think deeply and asks them to go out into the world and try to build a system that's better than we have. But in terms of specific, I'm trying to think of like specific investigative questions. Um, I mean, look, I tried, this is kind of a spoiler, but my dad was an investor in this industry, but all of the people whose policies he purchased died. And, you know, there are lots of investors who are not in that situation, who bought life insurance policies from people who then went on to live. And those are pretty bad investments for those people. There's a couple who was in a position like that, whose story we include through archive in the film. But I did a lot of reporting trying to talk to people now in that situation, and see how not only how they that couple who I included, for example, like they were raging in the press. I mean, they were angry that these guys hadn't died. I mean, plain and simple. And I would really like to hear one of those investors now not only talk about how it feels, but try and explain how shameless they were about the reaction in those days. I mean, when I watched that archive initially, my thought was literally like, have you no shame? You're going on national television talking like this. Like, you have to know this isn't going to age well. So that was one question I sort of was left with was, what is the story that those people are telling themselves now? Do they still think that they were screwed over, or do they maybe understand that they were butthurt about losing some money and maybe owe those guys an apology?
What are you looking into next? Do you have another project you're working on or thinking about?
Yes, I have another fascinating queer history short. It's called Odd Man In. It tells the story of a little known um, gay writer from the 1950s who helped to found the modern day gay movement and then betrayed it. So
Oh,
that's all I'll give you for now, but
that's
it's with ITVS and it'll be out this year.
that is a great tease. I like that.
Thank you.
Well, I always like to talk to people who have made great projects and ask them, what have you seen that's really moved you? A short feature, something else? Doesn't have to just be one.
Yeah, what's really moving me? This is maybe not a super original answer, but I was really, really moved this year by The Perfect Neighbor. I've done a lot of criminal justice reporting, and I always really appreciate a a film built off a non-traditional archive. We see films that are verite, we see a lot of films with archive from network news, but what does it look like to try and piece together a story from a different like visual source? And they just did such a good job of that. I mean, Gita is a force. So that film is amazing. Come See Me in the Good Light made my heart cry and sing. It's a film that shows how you can make a verite film that is also poetry, and not just because their protagonist happens to be a poet. So that one really got to me. Let's see, what else this year? Those are the two that come to mind right now. Um, yeah, is that enough?
That's perfect. No, it's
I mean,
great.
I could
Always
rack
good.
my brain for more picks. Wait, let me just look at my watch list.
Everybody always says, "Can I look at my list? I'll get back to you later." That's fine. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, let me pull up my letterboxd. One second.
I like that. There you
Let's see what I got for you. Uh, oh, I loved Pee-wee. I mean, I loved Pee-wee. I like that it showed that you can tell a story that can maintain an audience's attention for hours and hours and hours. That's built principally from interview and archive. Like sometimes as documentary filmmakers, I think we need to do tricks to keep our audience's attention, and that film is proof that really all you need is a good story and a compelling character. They are doing most of the work for us if we're doing if we're doing our jobs right and giving them their platform. Oh, and I love sentimental value outside of the documentary world. And I had an interesting viewing experience of it, which is that I saw it at a cinema in Mexico City. So I was seeing a film that was like primarily not in English with subtitles that are primarily not in English. I speak Spanish, so this was intelligible to me, but it was a different kind of viewing experience, and I really loved it. My letterbox is not loading. So, oh, films, hold on.
I
So,
appreciate the commitment. You already gave me a lot of good answers. I know that you're like, I need to do more.
oh, one last one that I need to say that was a huge, huge, huge pick for me this year, and I've watched it a couple times, is Nickel Boys. That is such a great movie. And yeah, it was an important movie for me in thinking about perspective and time and how you can play with time as a way to ask the audience to see and feel resonances across history that might not be immediately apparent.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm for what you
Always.
like and also what you do. Equal energy for both of those things.
Good,
So
good.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Matt.
Of course, Abe.